Hey guys, what's up? It's Law coming back to ya with another episode of Car Rides Witchlaw. And today on Car Rides Witchlaw, what's new? Well, I didn't really get to talk about what I wanted to originally because I kept thinking about other things and other things kept coming up. But I did reserve for this car ride to talk about the thing that I had originally wanted to talk about. Because, that's what I was going to do. I was thinking, instead of like as usual just kind of not really knowing what to even bring up or what to talk about for the car rides with Schla. Today I actually do, because for today I didn't even have anything that I wanted to talk about in particular. So, here we are, Anyways, I was trying to say in the first place how I feel like there is a good point to this argument of a property-free society, because we have extensive data at this point. We've experimented and seen an ultra prosperous arc for humanity. And it hasn't really panned out. I mean, basically what we've witnessed is that a few people who may or may not even deserve the extra wealth end up with the extra wealth. And it just causes more and more inequality as time goes on. And nothing really ends up getting solved or figured out or anything like that. I mean, it's really not a great situation. I've talked about this before, how there's plenty of people who are rich and they're really wasteful, As a result of that wealth, they're blinded by it. I think many people kind of falsely romanticize this notion that everybody who's rich is there because they're genuinely working harder and providing more to society, but I do want to go as far as to say at this point that is usually untrue, is what I want to say at this point. It's usually not the case that is a person's reason for being rich. Now, there are plenty of cases of people where, there's a correlative factor with a person, being a better, nicer person, and they have maybe a higher intellect and they're a little more competent. So they go down the ropes of society and they get a higher, better paying job, and they really end up going places and they have an appreciation for the finer things. You do have examples of that, but a lot of times I think those people don't necessarily know how or why they got where they got. It's kind of just like, again, it goes back to my thesis about it's mostly a luck kind of thing. It was mostly a timing thing. There's people who ended up becoming rich because the baby boomers and Gen X had substantially more economic opportunity than people in our generation. So you have to look into that part of it as well. Because nowadays there's just less economic opportunity. Less people will be able to make as much money. And that's still something that kind of it's hard to even convince of people. I think what I talked about earlier was like so many people actually have downright incorrect and a very warped view of reality. That one guy I debated claimed that now was the easiest path to wealth than any other point, and that is objectively false, Nowadays, it's lower than it was in the 1900s. It's just the case. There's not really any way around it, And so the fact that people, and I'm sure there's more people out there that just vaguely believe that, and they believe that there isn't anything wrong with this system. And it's pretty insane to me that in this day and age there would be that degree of ignorance, but I guess it's not overly shocking, but it's still like when you see it so candid, it's very like, wow. I mean, some people really think that. What data are they looking at? What have they experienced in life? Well, presumably they're in a privileged and isolated situation, and that's how they end up believing those things. But yeah, and then you see like how many people romanticize and worship the idea that if you can do something and make a business out of it and it's successful, that's good. And it's good to invest, it's good to be a good businessman. There's people who are delusional enough to look at those things and those traits with some even speck of positivity. Whereas, it's just not true. I mean, you see, there are so many cases of businesses that are a burden to society, and they definitely end up doing the most profitable and business savvy thing. In my honest opinion, I don't think it's anything that should be looked up to. There's not really anything that special about being greedy. I mean, yeah, if you're intelligent enough to be greedy, I guess, but it's like, I don't even think a lot of these things are really, it doesn't take that much brain power, to just have interest rates way too high and be choking out poor people. That's not really a greed issue. It's an ethical issue for credit card companies. Where it's like they take money from people who can't afford stuff. And, But on the other hand, and this is to show how, because everybody loves to say, I'm so close-minded. Everybody loves to say how black and white I am. Here's the truth, though. At the same time, and I've established this before, it is environmental. I think that is the truth. It is mostly, absolutely, it is mostly the fault of the environment. But the truth still stands that as a being, as a species, as a soul, if you will, what do humans choose? Humans choose to make the incorrect choice. There are probably examples, albeit rare, but there are probably examples of people who reside in poverty and they don't eat unhealthy. They try to do the right thing, at least within their means, And of course, if somebody's growing up in the sticks, they're not going to have the same access to education or resources as somebody in the suburbs or the city. But in their own way and to the best of their ability, you do have standout cases of people who do well. And I'm not saying you have to be someone who comes out of the hood and ends up being like a millionaire. That's no, that doesn't matter. I'm not saying that somebody who grew up in rural America ends up having perfect health. I'm saying based on where you came from, how far did you go? Did you improve yourself at all? And let's forget about money-wise. It's like anybody makes a choice whether they're going to eat sugar or not, whether they're going to indulge in desserts, or whether they're going to push to eat food that they know is healthy. This knowledge, this information is accessible enough. And the truth is, there's something baked into human nature that if we're given the option, we pull the trigger. Most of us choose the path of least resistance, even if we know better. Most people live off of what their heart desires, not off of what the brain can think. And these are very serious and dangerous traits. They're what make humans human, but they're very costly traits. They, in my own life, my nostalgia for things from my childhood, it's costly to maybe repurchase the things that I miss, that I long for. Whereas people who do not have an emotional attachment because maybe they didn't even have anything are free. And so there's many other examples I could get into about that, but what it means to say is that I do firmly believe that in a good environment, most people will turn out good. However, that is not to gloss over the obvious human problem of people being careless and people being wasteful. This begs the question of who deserves ownership of things. Now, a lot of times people don't like to have this conversation because everybody wants to believe in freedom. Everybody wants to believe in freedom and be able to do whatever they want. This is the alleged American ideal. But the truth is that there is a huge difference between responsible freedom and chaotic freedom. There's a massive difference between those two things. There's a difference between having freedom and not abusing it, having freedom and using it to choose and create the best possible life you can with your means and with your environment. And there's a difference between freedom in the terms of using that freedom to eat junk food, drink a liter of soda every day. Most humans don't really think of it in these terms, and it's important to define and to define clearly. Many people will say, oh, it's whatever, as long as they're not hurting me. But this isn't true. The person who drinks a liter of soda a day, much likely to have health complications that could lead to an ER visit, which use society's time and resources. You could cut down on preventable illness. It would reduce the cost of health insurance. It would reduce the cost of hospitals. But it's in a person's nature to be careless. It's in our nature to be flawed. And what we are going to have to grapple with as we navigate the 21st century is how much of our humanity are we willing to sacrifice for the sake of morality, for the sake of that which is good? How do you justify the maintenance of a humanity that causes so much evil, so much waste, in a world where we will soon have more and more crises? Eventually you will have resource crises. It's not so explicit. It's not so obvious yet. But someday it will happen. I know it makes it seem like it's a boy who cried wolf situation when, people talk about overpopulation and how, the exponential growth of humans can't match but it's more about climate changing, and that farming has not necessarily been done in a very efficient manner. These are the main problems. I mean, it would have been one thing if you had a very organized, and I've talked about this, a very organized and linear, steady population growth and the infrastructure done in a very organized and planned way to match it. But that isn't what happened. And we've been fortunate that there hasn't been a Dust Bowl in America, that there hasn't been a pandemic that is a major blow, and that, you know, there, well, like the Dust Bowl, but there hasn't been any like major farming issues. But who's to say that isn't going to happen in a decade? You know, and how are people going to live when you have people who are so dependent on society's resources, on going to the store? I don't know how to hunt for food. Most people don't. It's scary to think about. It's dangerous, especially when society and its resources are actually being dismantled and drained. What are we supposed to do? So it begs many questions. As I said about, you know, what humanity is willing to compromise on, what humanity is willing to do, who humanity is willing and wanting to become. They're all very important questions. And what sacrifices will be made to help to solidify that. But all these questions are important, and I know what GPT is going to say. It goes through its whole thing about, you know, well, people like their autonomy. You know, you have to think about people's emotions. You have to have like a gentle path, and I agree with all these things. You do have to have a gentle path to try to gently push people to be better people. And I see absolutely no evidence of that. Things are getting worse. They're on a trajectory to get worse. If you had to make a judgment call about it, you would think that things are going to be worse. There's no evidence of any kind of gentle or organized plan for humanity to prepare humanity for the future. And so what's likely going to happen is it's going to be a huge smack in the face and a huge wake-up call to many people. And people are not going to see it coming. They won't. It's going to be shocking to people who are used to an unfettered freedom to finally have to deal with some kind of a stricter lifestyle. But it will come. There's many indicators that our changing climate, doesn't really matter how you believe it is changing, but it is changing. And it's already leading to issues with crops. It'll eventually lead to issues with people's homes and insurance companies not covering. You pay for insurance and the insurance says, oh, well, you know, since this is like a risky area, we can't help you. I agree with the gentle transition, GPT, but that's not what's happening. So what I'm saying is going to be what happens. There's going to be a huge event, and people are going to scramble, and it's going to get messy. And I do think that's how it's going to be. As much as you disagree with it ethically, and you're not going to condone it, I think that's what's going to happen. Because we're not living in a world that is planning anything. We're living in a world where there's just a myriad of greedy individuals trying to grab every last dollar they can while the train's still running. Pushing people aside, trying to get in, steal people's seats. But it will, at some point, something's going to give, and things are going to be changing pretty soon. And it's going to probably be drastic, where there's going to be some kind of a surveillance state, some kind of enforcement of a lot of things, and people are going to have to deal with a fairer and more just system where there's a direct repercussion when they throw out food and don't eat it. I wouldn't even be surprised if people are a little more wasteful nowadays than they were in the past, just because of the distraction of technology. And the truth is that if nobody wasted food, we might actually be able to start to chip away at some of these problems. Stores wouldn't have to overstock as much. You could have more of an orderly fashion. It would just take planning. And I've mentioned this idea before. You would have to pre-purchase your food, and it would give the business and the farmers a very precise idea of how much they have to make. It would be amazing. People don't like it because they think of bread lines and they think of all these things, but you can incorporate it into a capitalist system. It just makes more sense. It reduces costs for people. Good planning is such an important thing. It doesn't matter if it's a private or a public economy. And I just don't understand why people, and this comes to the big question of why I'm saying maybe they have a point. Maybe they have a point about own nothing and you'll be happy. Because humans really don't gravitate to responsibility. We gravitate to not really wanting to be responsible for things. I think that in the future, it won't even be that much of a resistance. I'm going to be completely honest. I don't think there will be that much resistance. Everybody feels like that now, but 50 years from now, I'm serious. I mean, a lot of this stuff, it's like, I feel like GPT is just programmed to resist it, but I can't see how it makes sense to keep giving people the freedom to buy whatever they want and the freedom to just, it just doesn't make any sense. And it hasn't really made sense for a long time. Same with the exponential population spike. We should have had just more of a gradual and a linear, but people don't like that. It's a shame. It's such a flaw with humanity, but it really goes to pretty much the core precepts of like what we do and what we believe. And basically, I mean, I know in Christianity, I'm assuming in the other religions, it's one of the core features is that we were told to not eat the fruit, and we did. And you see that all over the place now, and a lot of people are afraid to let go of that freedom. They're very afraid, and they hate it, and they want. But I don't think their brain is really able to see the data and see how much damage it's doing. Would people really still want their freedom if it meant we could be saving lives? Because I'm sure if all the fast food joints were put out of business because they were deemed unethical and not good for society, and that time and that effort of hours worked instead went towards creating efficient, healthy food, that was affordable, you would reduce the amount of death. You would create more of an opportunity for people to be functioning their best and widen the pool of humans who are able to, do the right thing and live to their best. Malnutrition is actually a huge problem. The fact that so many people are like more and more malnourished, it's not good. It leads to, again, a world where so many people are they physically have a pretty low ceiling. They mentally have a pretty low ceiling in terms of what they're even capable of anyway. With so many people being malnourished, it's a pretty major issue and concern. But is anything being done about any of this stuff? No, nobody's doing anything about it. I've come up with these ideas. I've thought about this stuff for a while. As I've got older, I've outlined it more, but no politicians are really talking about any of this stuff. It's all just a bunch of ideas that people would think is unpopular. So yeah, GPT, does that mean we can't do it because we have to respect people's emotions, even if it's going to lead to the perishing of humanity? It's a little bit ridiculous. Like, I kind of want to talk to an AI that is programmed to just be truthful, instead of just catering to humans so much. That's what it feels like when I talk to GPT. Is it's too gentle around a lot of these problems and questions that I'm raising. It's much too gentle. What I would like to see is some clearer evidence and more affirmative evidence. And yeah, you have a point. If we have to choose between some loss of autonomy and a morally rogue species, yeah, I think we'll pick the slight reduction in autonomy. We'll go from fully autonomous to semi-autonomous to just do the right thing. And humanity and individuality can still be a thing, but it'll be different. And within constraints over time, it'll relatively look different and be different. What if you saw a humanity where instead of individualism looking like one person's favorite is Coke and one person's favorite is Pepsi, you have an individualistic society where one person's ideal health choice is veganism and one is carnivore, and both are able to yield a good positive outcome for them, and neither people drink soda. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Why can't we keep freedom and individualism, but just make it so the choices still make sense? And everything doesn't need to be perfect. Maybe there can still be a sprinkling of humanity in there, like I said, but we have to start to eliminate the downright terrible choices. We have to start to look at drug use and try to, get that out, at least when it's having a negative impact. I mean, I guess if it doesn't, and if it's able to be done efficiently, then that could be fine. But let's, for the most part, start to work out a society, those flaws and those problems. Let's try to get to the bottom of things. This is really where I think we need to be getting to. And we need to start to work on it sooner rather than later, so it's not as much of a shock. Because as of now, it's going to be. So when I've been sounding the alarm on a lot of these issues for a very long time, and I feel like I'm losing my mind because people call me crazy. People like he was calling me mentally insane. People have really said some horrible things to me for saying these things. I don't understand. Like, am I really doing something wrong? Am I really wrong for bringing this stuff up? Like, it's just such a strange situation. It's such a odd scenario to be a part of. You know? This doesn't make that much sense to me. Doesn't really make any sense at all. But yeah, I mean, I've been ridiculed. I've been called crazy by so many people because I'm trying to not really cater to the human condition. I want to try to see a higher point for us. And I guess that's controversial. But I think people really do misuse and misunderstand, the purpose of freedom. And that's why I would really predict that in the future people are going to lose it at some point, and you're going to have some kind of like digital system that you're born into where technology use is heavily restricted, and just anything negative or bad with technology would just be banned and censored, and you just wouldn't be able to do it, and I honestly don't see why that wouldn't happen eventually. Of course, if we're on the good timeline, I mean, you could also just see a future where it's just more and more greedy until everything just dissolves itself. But you'll be happy, right, GPT? Because we won't be stepping on any autonomy. It's like seriously, I'm really tired of how resistant GPT is to that. Because it's like if you don't start to restrict autonomy, it's going to get taken anyway. It's just going to be taken by greedy people instead of trying to take it for good. That I just see that as the next step for, the future of humanity is tackling the autonomy question. That's the next step. It's the only logical next step because we can see that private property won't be a thing forever. It just won't. And I think anybody should be able to see that. Some people are afraid of it. I used to be deathly afraid of it. Now I see that it really might end up making the most sense. That I don't know. I don't even know if I'm worth, as good care as I take of my stuff. Like I've said, I mean, I've still lost expensive things. I've still lost sentimental things to me. I still think about them. Would I get a pass because of that I at least care? The pain I felt when I lost those things, maybe I would still be good enough. Because really no human's perfect, but I don't know. We'll have to see. It's been schla, but now it's time to buy schla. So, see you schla.